The church hall smelled of cinnamon and shame. Matthew Carey stood in the doorway. 3 children pressed against his legs like frightened colts seeking shelter from a coming storm. Families streamed past them carrying covered dishes, Dutch ovens trailing steam, pie plates wrapped in checkered cloth, baskets of fresh bread that made his stomach clench with hunger he'd learned to ignore. His hands hung empty at his sides, calloused carpenter hands that had once built cradles and coffins, hope chests and church pews. Now they built nothing, held nothing. Papa. Sarah tugged his sleeve, her 10-year-old voice barely a whisper. Maybe we should go home. Home. The word tasted bitter. Their cabin held 3 straw mattresses, a cold hearth, and memories of a woman who would never again stand at the stove. Hannah had been gone 14 months now. The fever took her in September, and Matthew had been falling ever since. Thomas, 7 years old and already learning silence, stared at his worn boots. Little Eliza clutched her cornhusk doll, the one Hannah had made the Christmas before she died. The doll's dress was fraying now. Like everything else, Matthew couldn't afford to fix. "We'll just stay a few minutes," he said, though he didn't believe it. They pressed against the wall near the coat pegs, trying to occupy as little space as possible. The fellowship hall blazed with November warmth, 3 pot-bellied stoves working hard against the cold. Long tables covered in more food than Matthew's children had seen in months. Turkey and venison, sweet potatoes glistening with honey, green beans seasoned with bacon, pies cooling on every windowsill. And the laughter, Lord, the laughter hurt worst of all. Widow Perkins passed them with a platter of rolls, her eyes flickering to Matthew's empty hands. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her glance said plenty. Some folks contribute. Some folks just take. Matthew's jaw tightened. He'd been a contributing man once, built half the furniture in this town, repaired the church bell tower after the lightning strike of '82, taught Sunday school with Hannah, back when faith came easy and the future stretched out like endless prairie. Then the fire took his workshop. The bank took his savings. The fever took his wife. And piece by piece, Matthew Carey had been whittled down to this, a man with nothing, standing at the edge of abundance. 3 hungry children pressed against his legs. "Papa!" Eliza looked up, her mother's eyes in a 5-year-old face. "Why didn't we bring food?" His silence was answer enough. Carrie Sullivan had made 3 pies because the empty hours needed filling. She stood at the dessert table arranging them apple with lattice crust, pumpkin with nutmeg clouds, pecan gleaming like amber, and told herself this was contribution enough. The banker's daughter, doing her charitable duty, feeding the community that her father held mortgages over. She was reaching for a pie server when she saw them. The man stood near the coat pegs like a fence post in a flood weathered, rigid, bracing against something the crowd couldn't see. 3 children huddled around him. The oldest girl had her hand on his sleeve, pulling gently toward the door. The boy studied his boots as if they contained scripture. The littlest one clutched a tattered doll and stared at the food tables with naked longing. They hadn't brought anything. Carey recognized the man. Matthew Carey, the carpenter whose workshop had burned last winter. His wife had died not long after. She remembered Hannah Carey quiet, kind, the sort of woman who remembered everyone's name and made you feel like the only person in the room. These children had her eyes. Carrie picked up 2 of her pies and walked toward them before she could think better of it. "Excuse me." She stopped in front of the oldest girl, smiling. "I have a terrible problem." Matthew Carey straightened, suspicion flickering across his features. Carey ignored him. She'd learned that wounded men spoke more easily when you didn't look directly at their wounds. "I made 3 pies," she continued, addressing the children, "and I've only got 2 hands. I need helpers to serve them. Would you 3 be willing?" The girl looked up at her father. The boy stopped studying his boots. The little one hugged her doll tighter, but her eyes had sparked with something that looked like hope. Carrie knelt to the littlest one's level. "What's your doll's name?" "Rosie." The word came out soft, almost surprised. "Rosie is beautiful. Did your mama make her?" The child nodded. She had good hands. Your mama. Carrie looked at the cornhusk doll with genuine admiration. I can tell. She rose and met Matthew Carey's eyes for the first time. Would you let them help me? I always make too much. Something passed across his face, gratitude wrestling with pride, need battling with shame. Finally, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Sarah took the apple pie. Thomas carried the stack of napkins. Eliza slipped her small hand into Carrie's larger one. The cornhusk doll tucked under her other arm, as Carrie led them toward the dessert table. She glanced back once. Matthew Carey was watching them go, his empty hands hanging at his sides. But his eyes looked different now. Matthew watched his children transform. Sarah stood behind the dessert table, explaining to Mrs. Henderson that the apple pie used dried fruit since fresh apples were dear this year. She spoke with quiet confidence, as if she belonged there, as if she'd always belonged. Thomas had been adopted by the blacksmith's son, a freckled boy named Daniel, who apparently shared Thomas's fascination with how things were built. They sat in the corner now, heads bent over a carved wooden horse Daniel was showing him, discussing the grain of the wood and the shape of the legs. And little Eliza, who had barely spoken since her mother died, was chattering to the banker's daughter about Rosie the doll and whether cornhusk or cloth made better doll clothes. Matthew felt something dangerous happening in his chest. Hope. The most treacherous feeling of all. A shared table is sacred ground, Hannah used to say. She believed that breaking bread together was how strangers became neighbors, how neighbors became family. She'd built their home around that table pine wood. 8 chairs, room for whoever needed feeding. The table was still there. In the cold cabin, Matthew couldn't bring himself to sit at it anymore. He was so lost in memory that he didn't notice Carrie Sullivan approach until she was beside him, holding a cup of coffee. You look like a man who could use warming up. He accepted the cup without thinking. The heat seeped into his cold fingers. Thank you for what you did. The words came rough, unused. The children were a genuine help. She said it simply, without false kindness. Eliza told me Rosie's entire life story while we served the pecan pie. Matthew almost smiled. Eliza used to talk from sunup to sundown before her mama passed. He nodded. The coffee suddenly tasted like grief. They stood in silence, watching the children. The hall hummed around them, conversations, laughter, the clatter of serving spoons, all the sounds of community that Matthew had locked himself away from for 14 months. My mother died when I was 6, Carrie said quietly. Father forgot how to talk to me after that. Still hasn't remembered. Matthew looked at her, really looked. The banker's daughter. Fine wool dress, hair pinned neatly. Every inch of her proper and polished, but her eyes held a loneliness that matched his own. Before he could respond, Sarah caught his gaze from across the room. She was smiling. Actually smiling, the way she used to before the world broke. And Matthew realized he couldn't leave now. Couldn't drag them away from this warmth back to their cold cabin and colder silence. His children had crossed a threshold tonight. He wasn't sure he could follow them, but he couldn't pull them back either. He was trapped by their joy. The evening deepened around them like a held breath. Matthew stayed at the edges while his children drifted toward the center. He watched Carrie guide them through the hall, introducing them to families he'd been avoiding for over a year. The Hendersons with their twin boys. The Martins, who ran the general store. Old Doc Patterson, who'd tried so hard to save Hannah and wept at her graveside. Each introduction was a small miracle. His children shaking hands, answering questions, being seen as something other than the carpenter's pitiful orphans. Thomas had fully bonded with Daniel, the blacksmith's son. The boy sat at the children's table now. Daniel demonstrating how his father had carved the wooden horse using a special knife. Matthew recognized a whittling blade he'd made 2 years ago, before everything fell apart. Your daddy made this knife, Daniel told Thomas proudly. My papa says Mr. Carey was the finest carpenter in 3 counties. Thomas's chin lifted. Just slightly. Just enough for Matthew to notice. He was working his way toward the coffee when Widow Perkins's voice cut through the crowd. Well, I say if folks can't contribute, they shouldn't take up space at the table. She wasn't speaking to anyone in particular, but her eyes found Matthew's. Some of us have been cooking for 3 days. Others just show up empty-handed expecting to be fed. The words hit like buckshot. Matthew felt the familiar heat of shame climbing his neck. That's enough, Adelaide. Reverend Hollister materialized beside Matthew, his weathered face stern beneath white hair. The old preacher had buried Hannah with such gentleness that Matthew had nearly broken apart at the graveside. The carpenter and his children are welcome in God's house. Hollister's voice carried just far enough. Same as everyone. Widow Perkins sniffed but retreated toward the dessert table. Hollister turned to Matthew, his expression softening. Glad you came tonight. Been praying for you. For all 4 of you. Reverend, don't. Hollister clapped his shoulder. Showing up takes courage. Matthew, don't let anyone tell you different. From across the room, Carrie witnessed the exchange. Matthew saw something flicker across her features, not pity, not sympathy, but understanding. She knew what it cost to stand in this room. A small body collided with his legs. Papa, Eliza beamed up at him, face smeared with pecan pie. I helped give out all the pie, and Miss Carrie said I was her best helper, and Daniel's mama gave me a piece. With extra pecans. Matthew knelt, pulling out his handkerchief to wipe her cheeks. Her skin was warm. Her eyes were bright. She looked like a child again instead of a small ghost carrying grief too heavy for her years. Sounds like you earned it, little bird. Can we stay longer, please? Papa Sarah made a friend, and Thomas is learning about whittling. And I want to show Miss Carrie how Rosie dances. Matthew looked at his daughter's face, Hannah's eyes, Hannah's smile, Hannah's endless hope, and felt something crack inside his chest. We can stay a while longer. Eliza squeezed his neck hard enough to hurt, then raced back toward the dessert table where Carrie waited. Showing up takes courage. The Reverend's words echoed. Maybe that was true. But staying took something Matthew wasn't sure he had anymore. The cold found her first. Carrie had slipped onto the church porch to escape the noise to breathe air that didn't smell like other people's happiness. The stars were sharp tonight, scattered across the black like spilled salt. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. Miss Sullivan. Matthew stopped at the porch rail, keeping proper distance. Needed some air. Something like that. She pulled her shawl tighter. It's a lot. Isn't it all that? Joy? Yes. She smiled ruefully. Everyone else seems to know how to do it naturally. He was quiet for a moment. Used to come easy for me too. Before. The word hung between them. Before. Such a small word to hold so much loss. I know about the bank, Carrie said. She hadn't planned to say it. But the darkness made honesty easier. I know my father holds the note on your workshop property. I saw the ledger. Matthew's shoulders stiffened. Miss Sullivan, I'm not my father. She turned to face him. I wanted you to know that. Whatever happens with the bank, I'm not him. He stared at her, and she saw the suspicion war with something softer. Why are you telling me this? Because I know what it's like to be measured by what your family has. She gestured toward the fellowship hall. Everyone in there sees the banker's daughter. They see silk dresses and the big house on the hill. They don't see... What? Carrie looked up at the stars. Holidays in that big house. Father at one end of a table that seats 20. Me at the other. Silver service, crystal glasses, more food than 2 people could ever eat. And silence. Matthew. So much silence I used to talk to the portraits just to hear another voice. When she looked back at him, his expression had changed. The suspicion was gone. My wife used to say loneliness was the coldest room in any house, he said quietly. She was wise. She was everything. The words caught. And now she's gone. And I don't know how to carry it anymore. The grief, the failing, watching my children go hungry while I can't. He stopped, jaw clenched. Carrie wanted to touch his arm. She didn't. Instead, she offered the only truth she had. I made 3 pies because I hoped someone might need them. She felt her voice tremble. Turns out I needed you to need them. I needed to be useful to someone who wasn't just being polite because of my father's money. Matthew was silent for a long moment. Then, Hannah would have liked you. I think I would have liked her too. Inside. Someone started playing piano. A hymn come. Thou fount of every blessing, and children's voices rose to meet it. We should go back in, Carrie said, before they send a search party. Matthew nodded. But neither of them moved. Miss Sullivan. Carrie. He tested the name. Thank you for seeing them, my children. I mean, not as charity cases, as helpers. It wasn't charity. Matthew, it was just, what? She smiled. Maybe it was 2 lonely people figuring out they aren't as alone as they thought. The warmth lasted exactly 12 minutes. Matthew returned to the fellowship hall with something unfamiliar settling in his chest, a looseness where the tight knot of shame usually lived. He was making his way toward the children's table when he heard his name, the Carey property. 3 months past due now. He froze behind the kitchen doorway. Shame about that. Mr. Sullivan's voice, cold and clinical. Good carpenter, I'm told, but can't pay his debts with wood shavings. Can he? What'll you do? Another voice. Mr. Dawson, who owned the feed store. Foreclose, I expect, after the new year. Give him the holiday at least. Can't look heartless at Christmas. The men laughed. Matthew felt it in his stomach like a physical blow. His children were running around earlier. Pitiful little things. Heard he couldn't even bring a covered dish tonight. Some men just can't keep their heads above water. Better for everyone when they stop struggling and let themselves sink. Matthew's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the wall, breathing through the anger, the humiliation, the sick certainty that nothing had changed. He was still a line item in a ledger. Still the struggling man who couldn't keep his head above water. Carrie's father. The man who'd been kind to her was the same man picking apart Matthew's failure like it was Sunday dinner. Gossip. He found Sarah first. She was laughing with a girl named Beth. Their heads bent over a ribbon Beth had given her. We're leaving. His voice came out harsh. Get your brother and sister. Papa. Sarah's smile vanished. But sigh, now, Sarah. He gathered them too quickly. Too roughly. Thomas protested he was still talking to Daniel about the wooden horse. Eliza burst into tears when Matthew pulled her away from the dessert table. I want to stay, Papa, please. We're going home. Faces turned toward them. Widow Perkins looked satisfied. Reverend Hollister started to rise from his chair, and Carrie appeared in the doorway, blocking their exit. Matthew! Her face was pale. She'd heard something. Seen something. What happened? Nothing that concerns you. Miss Sullivan? The formal name was a wall, and he built it deliberately. Please. She stepped closer. The children. Your father is right. The words tasted like ash. Some men should stop struggling and let themselves sink. Guess we'll save him the foreclosure paperwork. Her face crumpled with understanding. You heard him. Oh, Matthew. We don't belong here. He couldn't look at her. We've got nothing. Nothing to offer. Nothing to contribute. Nothing to... Eliza's wail cut through the hall. I want to stay with the pie lady. Matthew finally looked at Carrie. Her eyes were bright with tears. Behind her, the fellowship hall blazed with warmth that wasn't his to share. Thank you for your kindness, he said stiffly. But we need to go. He pushed past her into the cold night, his children crying behind him. The November air bit through his shirt. Matthew made it halfway across the churchyard before the weight of what he'd done crashed over him. His children stood behind him, Sarah silent and stricken. Thomas clutching the wooden horse Daniel had pressed into his hands. Eliza sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. He stopped walking. What am I doing slowly? He turned and knelt in the frozen grass. Come here, all of you. They came, even Sarah, who had every right to hate him. They huddled close, and Matthew wrapped his arms around all three of them, feeling their shivering bodies, their tear-streaked faces. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry. Why can't we stay? Eliza hiccuped. The pie lady was nice, Papa. She let me help. I know. Little bird. And Daniel gave me this. Thomas held up the wooden horse. He said I could keep it. We were going to be friends. Matthew's throat closed. Papa. Sarah's voice was quiet but steady. Mama always said something about tables. What? A shared table is sacred ground. Remember, she said showing up was the gift? The food didn't matter. Just being there. Matthew stared at his oldest child. Hannah's words and Hannah's daughter's voice. We showed up. Papa. Sarah's eyes met his. We showed up. Isn't that enough? Before he could answer, lantern light spilled across the grass. Carrie walked toward them. No shawl, no coat, just a lantern held high against the dark. She stopped a few feet away. I'm not going to make excuses for my father, she said. He's a hard man who sees the world in numbers, but I'm not him. Matthew, and your children lit up that room tonight? They can't eat light? His voice cracked. They need things I can't give them. You gave them yourself. You brought them here even though it hurt. Carrie knelt in the cold grass, heedless of her fine dress. Your children gave help tonight. Real help. Eliza served pie to 20 people. Thomas taught Daniel about wood grain. Sarah helped Mrs. Henderson organize the dessert table. That's not nothing. Carrie's voice firmed. That's contribution. That's community. That's what Thanksgiving actually means, not showing off who has the most food, but sharing whatever we have. And you have 3 children who needed to belong somewhere tonight. Eliza reached toward Carrie. Miss Carrie, can I show you how Rosie dances now? Carrie opened her arms, and Eliza went to her. Cornhusk doll clutched tight. Matthew watched his youngest curl against a woman she'd known for 3 hours. Trusting, unafraid. You came with 3 children who needed to belong. Carrie's eyes seemed to say, that's not nothing. Matthew, that's everything. He looked at Sarah, who'd spoken her mother's words, at Thomas, who held a friend's gift like treasure, at Eliza, who was already showing Carrie the doll's dancing technique. They were his everything, and they wanted to stay. Matthew took a breath, released 14 months of pride. Let the cold air fill the space where shame used to live. We'll stay. The return felt different. Matthew walked back into the fellowship hall with Carrie beside him. 3 children racing ahead. Faces turned curious, concerned. A few openly relieved. Reverend Hollister met them at the door. Glad you came back. Almost didn't, but you did. The old preacher smiled. That's what matters. The children melted back into the crowd. Thomas found Daniel immediately, showing him the wooden horse, the 2 boys laughing. Sarah slipped back beside Beth, and if her new friend noticed the tear tracks on Sarah's cheeks, she didn't mention them, just shifted closer, resuming their conversation as if nothing had interrupted it. And Eliza stood at the dessert table, cornhusk doll in one hand, a slice of pie in the other, chattering to Widow Perkins about Rosie's dress. Even Adelaide Perkins seemed to soften. She patted Eliza's head and offered her a second piece. Matthew watched from the edge of the room. Coffee cup in hand, Reverend Hollister had pressed it on him and felt the walls around his heart beginning to crumble. Carrie appeared at his elbow. She's got a gift. That one. Eliza. I mean, her mother had it too. Could talk to anyone about anything. Made people feel seen. Yeah. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the children they'd somehow claimed together in the space of one evening. Finally, Matthew turned to face her. Why? The question came rough. Tonight. I mean, why did you do all this? You don't know us. You've got nothing to gain from... Stop. Carrie met his eyes. You're about to list all the reasons I shouldn't have been kind. I just don't understand. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I have money. Matthew, a big house. More dresses than I can wear. Silver service for 30 guests who never come. She paused. But I don't have family. I don't have anyone who needs me. I don't have a little girl who trusts me enough to show me how her doll dances. Matthew's chest ached. You have all of that, she continued. 3 children who love you, who need you, who showed up tonight because you brought them. You have family, Matthew, real family. And you don't. No. Simple, honest. So maybe we're both poor in different ways, and maybe tonight I got to feel what richness feels like, just for a few hours. The words broke something loose in Matthew's chest. He felt it give way, all the grief, the shame, the desperate isolation, and in its place came something he hadn't felt in 14 months. He laughed. It surprised him, rusty, rough, almost painful but real. An actual laugh rising from somewhere he'd thought was dead. Carrie stared at him, startled. Then her face cracked into a smile, and she laughed too surprised, delighted, the sound as unexpected as his own. They stood there laughing together, 2 strangers who'd been poor in different ways, filling each other's empty spaces with something that felt terrifyingly like joy. Reverend Hollister watched from across the room. He leaned toward his wife. Well now, he said softly, that's something worth being thankful for. Matthew caught his breath, wiping his eyes. I forgot what that felt like. Laughing, being seen. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the banker's daughter, not silk dresses and silver service, but a woman as lonely as he'd been, reaching across the wilderness between them. You saw us tonight, not charity cases, not pitiful orphans, just us. That's all I ever wanted anyone to see in me. Her voice trembled. Just Carrie, not my father's money, not my mother's ghost, just me. I see you, Matthew said quietly. Carrie. The piano started up again, someone playing a harvest hymn, and around them the community settled into the evening's final warmth. They weren't poor anymore. The potluck wound toward ending like a river finding the sea. Families began gathering their dishes, wrapping leftovers, bundling children into coats. The noise softened from celebration to satisfaction, the quiet hum of people who'd been fed in more ways than one. Matthew sat at the long table now, no longer pressed against the wall. Thomas and Daniel had fallen asleep in the corner, the wooden horse clutched between them. Sarah and Beth had exchanged addresses, promising to write, promising to visit, and little Eliza had fallen asleep in Carrie's lap, corn-husk doll tucked under her chin, thumb drifting toward her mouth in the way she'd done as a baby. Carrie stroked the child's hair. She weighs almost nothing. She's been eating thin for too long. The admission came easier now. That changes. Carrie's voice held quiet determination. I'm bringing food to your cabin this week. And don't... She raised a hand as he started to protest. Don't you dare say charity. Call it neighbors helping neighbors. Call it Thanksgiving leftovers. Call it whatever lets your pride survive. Matthew smiled. Yes, ma'am. Reverend Hollister approached, his face soft with evening warmth. Matthew. I notice the pew rail in the front left section is coming loose. Wobbles something fierce. Been meaning to fix it myself, but I can fix it. The words came before Matthew could doubt them. This week, I've got my tools. We can pay you in firewood. The Martins donated 3 cords to the church last month, more than we can burn. Firewood. Enough to warm the cabin through December, maybe January. Matthew's throat tightened. That would be, he stopped, swallowed. That would help. Then it settled. Hollister clapped his shoulder. Good to have you back. Matthew, the church missed your hands. The Reverend moved on, and Matthew sat in the quiet aftermath, watching his children sleep among people who'd welcomed them home. Carrie shifted carefully, trying not to wake Eliza. I should let you take her. In a minute? He wanted to hold this moment a little longer, his daughter safe in a good woman's arms, his son surrounded by warmth, his own heart beating with something other than grief. Matthew, Carrie's voice was soft. I know we just met. I know this is probably too fast, too strange, too... Come to supper. She blinked. What? Sunday, after church. The invitation came from somewhere deeper than thought. The cabin's small, and I'm not much of a cook. But Sarah makes decent biscuits and I can manage stew. Come to supper. With us. Carrie's eyes glistened. Are you sure? No. He smiled. But I'm asking anyway. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Matthew gathered Eliza gently, settling her against his shoulder. She murmured but didn't wake, burrowing against his neck the way she'd done as an infant. Thomas woke when Sarah shook him, stumbling upright, the wooden horse still gripped in his small hand. They made their way to the door, accepting handshakes and blessings, promises of help and offers of work. The community that had seemed so hostile 2 hours ago now felt like a quilt pieces stitched together, warming what it covered. Outside, the stars blazed sharp and brilliant. November cold nipped at their cheeks, but the air smelled like wood smoke and possibility. Carrie stood in the church doorway, lantern raised. Watching them go, same time next Sunday, she called softly. For regular supper. Matthew turned. Sarah held Thomas's hand. Eliza breathed softly against his shoulder, behind him. The frontier darkness stretched endless and cold, but ahead was lantern light. We'll bring what we have, he said. Carrie smiled. That's always enough. They walked home beneath harvest stars, Sarah chattering quietly about Beth and ribbons and next Sunday. Thomas half asleep but still clutching his treasure. Eliza limp and trusting against Matthew's chest. Papa. Sarah looked up at him. I like it here. Here, we're not anywhere yet. Sweetheart. I mean here, this town, these people, I like belonging. Matthew shifted Eliza's weight, feeling the night cold on his face and the warmth of his children all around him. Me too. Sweetheart. Me too. The cabin waited ahead, cold. Yes, and empty of so much that used to fill it. But not for long. Sunday would bring a guest. Monday would bring work at the church. And after that, anything might happen. Even good things. Even hope. Matthew walked on beneath the stars, his children close. His heart cracked open wide enough for light to finally get through. For the first time since Hannah died, he believed tomorrow might hold something worth building. And that, he realized, was the truest kind of Thanksgiving.